Well, I have a line and wash for everyone today. An Inktober line and wash, no less. This is probably the only Inktober piece I'm going to get around to, but I did one, so I hope you will enjoy it. We're going to use the liners that I mentioned in the last video, just so you beginners who are getting started with pen and ink can see these actually in use. And it's going to be a lot of fun, and I have a little treat for you at the end. Where's your hat? You want people to see your brain? Okay, I'll help you with that. He wants you to know he's not all that dumb. You realize that's rubber, and I put it there. Well, we're going to start drawing, and I'm doing this pretty spontaneously, I guess. I like to do creepy trees. If you've watched this channel for long, you know that. And this is going to be hopefully a creepy tree in front of a equally creepy gate. Not exactly a scary scene, but it's my idea of a sort of a Halloween Inktober theme. I like the fantasaical elements in illustrators like Ian McHugh. Now, here are some pieces that sort of inspired this. A few weeks back, I did a piece inspired by Ian McHugh also. You may remember if you've seen it, some dilapidated buildings that were very inventive, very whimsical and fantasaical. This also is inspired by Ian McHugh. So yeah, we're just going to get in here and draw, and we're going to draw fairly detailed. And that's probably my first tip for beginners. Make sure you have a really solid drawn foundation, because it's more important even in pen and ink than it is in watercolor. So I will usually go to pretty great lengths to get the pencil right. And here it is. This is my completed pencil. And this gives me something that I'm really confident to ink. This is what I'll be using. These are the Statlers. I think this is some of the best ones out there. Yeah, there's an old man's face in this tree. So look for that. It's not hard to find. And I'm going to begin inking. Now, inking is a lot like watercolor in that you go light to begin with and define your shapes. Define your shapes, your outlines and stuff, and do it lightly. You can always go back over your lines and make them heavier, but it's almost impossible to make them lighter. Now, my particular style and what I feel comfortable with is I like to do my line rendering in little dots and pieces. I rarely ever do a continuous solid line around everything. I mean, and it may end up looking like it's outlined, but I like sort of the dot dash kind of placement. It's kind of a gingerly way to proceed, but it's worked for me, so I continue to do it that way. And I'll go through the whole piece and just add what I think are the essential lines. And what you're doing here, what I'm doing here, is refining the drawing, but at the same time simplifying. So I always put more detail in my drawing than I think is necessarily going to be there in the pen and ink. Well, that's kind of a style thing, but I think it's a good way to proceed, especially if you're a beginner. Refine, but simplify. These kind of scenes are just enormously fun to draw and ink. I especially enjoy, of course, as you know, the trees and the tree branches. But again, be very fine and light to begin with, especially if you're a beginner and you're not real confident. This is an 01, and I will do pretty much the whole thing in a size 01 nib. There are bigger ones, that go up to the boulder, That might be good for blackening in. I've just never found the need to do a lot of work with the bolder ones. So you can get by with an 01 and you can just continue to go over a line and make it bolder. And my dot dash approach that I was mentioning, that's pretty much a part of my style. And I try to be very suggestive with line rather than, strongly rendered and implied every detail. Sometimes I think I really fail at that, like I over rendered it. So I'm always working to refine and simplify, but um, impression is what I go for. And it's what, if you like this style of drawing and rendering, that's what you should work towards, creating an impression. Oh, and by the way, this is a Stillman and Byrne Nova series. That's their tinted gray or toned gray sketchbook. It's probably one of my favorite toned gray sketchbooks. The paper is heavier than the Strathmore toned gray, so it will take a little bit of watercolor. Now, this is not a cotton sketchbook, but it's fine for light washes. There's not going to be much layering, if at all, in this. Now, right here in these grasses, you can see how I'm just trying to create an impression of an edge. It'll be further defined when I get to the watercolor, but I'm not even necessarily following my pencil exactly. And the reason I'm doing that is just so my line will be expressive. If I follow a line too laboriously, it ends up looking that way. I will try to vary, even though I do start inking lightly, I will try to vary the weight of the line and get heavier in areas where I see it's going to need to be. Corners of overlaps, just places where I know it's going to get a little darker. I've already established my light source, which I think might be coming from the upper left. So I'm going to let that guide me where shadows are going to be and where bolder lines can be. But yeah, just to reiterate my previous tip, resist the urge to over define everything. It's just going to look heavy handed and it's not going to give you a lot of leeway as you go forward and decide what needs to be dark for shadow purposes. One thing you'll need to do if you're going to do a line and wash is decide how much shading and tone will be with the ink. In other words, that's usually hatching or cross hatching, and how much will be with the watercolor. In this case, I'm going to do most of the shade toning with watercolor. So I did a minimal amount of hatching or cross hatching. And when you go to erase, you're going to notice that pencil kind of supported a lot of that ink. And you're going to have to go back and strengthen some of the lines in some of the areas. And this is where I might start adding some little deep corners and heavier lines in places. So that's my next tip is erase and assess. Now it's time to tone this. And I'm going to use Ultramarine Blue and Red Iron Oxide, which together makes a nice sort of a Payne's gray. But what's good about the two colors is that I can bend it warm or I can bend it cool. All of the toning in here with watercolor is going to be gray. The tree, I decided, and the grasses, in some areas are going to be warm. So I have a slightly warmer gray, and these rocks and the wall are going to be a cooler gray. So that's the reason for using those two colors. And again, this is starting light and keeping it simple. Start light, keep it simple. You can always go back over it. Now, the reason I'm using toned gray here will become apparent in a bit. Wanted to be able to add some highlighting, but that's coming. Right now, I want to concentrate on those middle values and the darker values. And darker values, which are your spice, they really add the pop. You need to focus those. And so that's sort of my next tip is focus your detail and your values in a good eye-catching way. For me, that was the gate and the foot of that tree in that area. And I wanted that area to sort of be a shadowy area. The rest is all just kind of fall off in the amount of detail and hopefully leads your eye back. And you can see, in a line and wash, you don't really need a lot. I mean, I'm putting in really the final little bits here. And in this kind of a drawing, I think this is sufficient. Get across the point. A lot of you, I always ask about this brush or these Lebanson brushes. Make sure you check the description for my supplies. I always try to put them in there. If they're not in there, it's because I just missed it. So if you want to know what that brush is, just look down there. Now we're going to do some highlighting. And I like to use a Prismacolor white colored pencil. It's probably the most opaque white colored pencil out there. And it works great in these books. And I like to be able to kind of shade it off or soften off the edge. Graduate it, I guess. That's harder to do with white ink. You can do it with gouache, but I just like the pencil. And I want that wall to stand out. So we're going to have like a lower kind of glow to the sky. And then we're just going to pick very judiciously a few tops of things. And this is probably my last tip. And that's if you do some highlighting like this, whether it be gouache, whether it be in a toned sketchbook, do it sparingly. If you overdo the highlights, it shows. You just want glints, little areas that stand out that face your chosen light source. I think this is pretty much done. I'm going to call it done anyway. And this looks like the kind of thing that needs a story.
The whole memory of its origins have been lost. Villagers don't really talk about it much either. It's considered bad luck, it is. But, just occasionally, someone will venture a guess as to what lies beyond. No one really knows for sure, except maybe those who have actually passed through that wretched gate. They'll never reveal its secrets, though, for none of those folk have yet returned.
Thank you so much, everyone out there, for watching. I appreciate that so much. Thank you, patrons, for your support of this channel. Oh, and by the way, the voiceover was done by my son. He has a real talent for that. He's been practicing, and we just had a ball recording that voiceover. Everyone have a safe and happy Halloween if you've seen this before. We'll see everybody in the next video. Bye-bye.